by the time the under-cabinet lights flickered on, my whole body was already guilty. Not because I'd taken a diamond or a bottle of anything aged, but because a cloudy plastic container sat heavy in my tote, warm against my hip like a secret heartbeat. River North at night feels like glass and money and silence. This kitchen, all marble and steel, was supposed to stay spotless, untouched, forgettable. I was supposed to be forgettable. Instead, I stood at the island, hands shaking, listening to the storm breathe against the windows and praying nobody noticed the woman I'd become tonight. It was a little after 2 in the morning, the hour when the city's sirens feel far away and your thoughts get loud. The rest of the staff had gone hours earlier, moving like ghosts through private elevators, I leaving behind the sterile hum of air conditioning and the faint scent of lemon polish. Mr. Rinaldi liked his home run on schedule. No overtime, no lingering. I'd broken the rule the moment I slid the roasting pan from the trash and lifted the leftovers into my container, fast and careful like I was holding proof, not food, and my hands knew. Back home, Lily's school lunchbox waited on the counter, empty except for a sticky note from yesterday that said she'd traded her apple again. My daughter is 6, all sharp knees and big questions, and lately her asthma has been acting up. In my coat pocket, I carried the pharmacy printout with the total circled in red, a number that might as well have been a wall. I work 2 jobs when I can, but bills don't care how tired you are. So when I saw prime rib headed for the bin, I didn't see luxury. I saw tomorrow breakfast. The scrape of my spatula had been soft, almost respectful, until I heard the hallway again. Not footsteps, weight. A presence that made the whole apartment seem to hold its breath. I froze with the container half-zipped in my tote. The kitchen's gold light turned the rest of the room into shadows, and in those shadows a tall shape appeared, still. Cole Rinaldi didn't have to announce himself. He owned the silence the way other men owned cars. His shirt sleeves were rolled, his hair messy, like he'd been fighting numbers all night. His eyes found me and didn't blink. I'd seen his name on the mail that arrived in envelopes, and on the business magazines left in the study like trophies. People called him a businessman. In the service corridors, the older staff called him something else in whispers. A word that meant you didn't argue, and you didn't ask why. Standing there barefoot on polished stone, he looked less like a man and more like a decision. I tasted metal in my mouth. My palms dampened the tote handle. One wrong move and I'd be escorted out, and Lily would wake up to another promise I couldn't keep. Part of me wanted to spill everything right there, that I wasn't stealing to sell it, that I wasn't touching his silver, that I wasn't plotting anything. Part of me wanted to apologize so hard my knees would bruise the floor. But apology has never paid my rent. And in my world, people who beg get stepped on. I held my breath and waited for his reaction. He didn't reach for a phone. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move at all. And somehow that stillness felt louder than thunder outside. It made me wonder what else he knew. His gaze dipped to the tote at my side, then to my hands, then back to my face like he was mapping the lines people hide. I felt exposed in my uniform, the white collar too bright under the warm light. I could smell the food through the plastic, and I hated how my stomach answered it. The marble under my feet was cold enough to sting. Cole's expression didn't change, but his attention narrowed, sharp and quiet. I realized he wasn't deciding whether I'd broken a rule. He was deciding what kind of person I was with one look. Seconds stretched, and I remembered every warning I'd ever been given about powerful men who stay calm. Calm means control. Calm means they don't need to prove anything. I waited for punishment, for some gesture that would summon guards from behind hidden doors. Nothing. Cole leaned in the doorway, watching me like a scientist watching a reaction in glass. My throat tightened. I slid the zipper up on my tote, slow, as if sudden movement might crack me. Then I did the only thing I could do without begging. I lowered my eyes, stepped around him, and walked out quietly. The hallway outside the kitchen was darker, colder, lit by the city's reflections. My footsteps were soft, but my pulse was loud. I told myself to breathe and look normal, to be invisible again, yet I felt his attention behind me like heat through a door. I didn't turn around. I didn't run. I kept going down the service corridor toward the elevator that would drop me into the night. In my tote, the container tapped my hip, steady as a metronome, and I knew this wasn't finished. He was going to follow the question all the way home tonight. The service corridor swallowed me the second I cleared the kitchen doorway. The penthouse went back to its perfect hush, but I could still feel Cole Rinaldi's eyes on my back, like heat trapped behind glass. I kept my shoulders level and my steps quiet, the way staff are trained to move, the way I've trained myself to survive. The tote bumped my hip with each step, and I hated how loud that tiny sound felt. I didn't look over my shoulder. Looking would have made it real. In the elevator doors, my face looked pale, older than I was. The service elevator carried me down in slow silence, past floors I never saw, past rooms I only cleaned. My badge still worked, which meant I wasn't fired yet, and that confused me more than any shout would have. If I lost this job, Lily would lose her daycare slot, her school routine, her inhaler refills, now all the small scaffolding that keeps a kid steady. I pictured her sleeping sideways in bed, one hand curled around her stuffed rabbit. I pressed my palm against my tote, steadying it, steadying myself. Above me, the penthouse stayed untouched, and fear couldn't reach. The side door opened onto a slap of cold air and wet pavement. Chicago smelled like the river and exhaust and last call pizza, all mixed with rain. Streetlights made the sidewalk shine like black glass. I pulled my coat tighter and kept to the building's shadow, heading toward the bus stop on the corner. My shoes squeaked on the slick concrete. Every sound felt amplified, like the city was listening. I told myself Cole was upstairs, back to his screens, back to his world. Then I felt it again, that quiet pressure, as if someone had stepped out behind me. I didn't turn around. I just slowed, then stopped to tie a shoelace I didn't need to fix. In the reflection of a parked car, I saw a dark SUV at the curb half a block back, engine idling, lights off. When I moved, it rolled forward, not fast, just enough to stay near. My skin prickled. Maybe it was a rideshare. Maybe it was security. Maybe it was nothing. But if Cole wanted to fire me, why watch me leave? Why let me carry the evidence out into the night? I walked on, pretending heartbeat belonged to the rain. At the bus stop, the shelter smelled like damp metal and perfume. A couple argued on the far bench, and a man in a hoodie stared at his phone like it could save him. I stood near the timetable, keeping my tote close, watching the street the way I watch a stranger's hands. I learned that habit long before River North, and back when I counted coins for laundry and memorized which stairwells were safe. The SUV waited at the edge of my vision, not close enough to accuse, not far enough to ignore. I told myself it was nothing tonight. The bus arrived with a hiss and a spray of water. I climbed aboard, paid, and took a seat near the middle where I could see both doors. My reflection floated in the window, doubled with the city lights, and behind it I searched for that dark shape. The SUV pulled out a moment later, sliding into traffic like it belonged there. My stomach tightened. Was he punishing me? Protecting me? Studying me? I thought about Lily's morning alarm, the cereal I'd stretch with warm milk, and how one missed paycheck could topple everything. My hand stayed on the tote. As the bus rolled south, the skyline thinned and the streets changed their posture. River North's polished corners gave way to boarded storefronts and brick that looked tired. The passengers got quieter, like everyone had learned not to invite attention. I kept my gaze soft and my shoulders small, but inside I was counting exits. The tote felt heavier with every stop, not because of the food, but because of what it meant. If Cole really was behind me, he was choosing to see where I went when nobody was watching. That thought made my throat close. I swallowed hard. I got off near my stop and the bus pulled away, leaving me in a pocket of damp air and orange streetlight. My building was only 2 blocks, but the distance felt longer at this hour. I walked fast without running, keys threaded between my fingers out of habit. Somewhere behind me, an engine idled, then went quiet. I didn't look. I couldn't afford to look. I told myself to focus on Lily's face in the morning, on the way she'd smile if I made pancakes. Then I saw the corner ahead, and my body recognized it like a bruise. 2 men detached from the shadow of a recessed doorway, stepping into the streetlight as if it belonged to them. One was tall and loose-limbed, the other stockier, both dressed for the kind of cold that comes with waiting. They didn't rush me. They positioned themselves between me and my building with practiced patience, the way people do when they've done it many times. I knew them before I saw their faces, because my father's debt had introduced us months ago. Their eyes went to my tote, then my pockets, and I understood this was not random. It was scheduled. 2 men filled the south side sidewalk like a gate, shoulders squared, faces half hidden by night. Rain slid off the streetlight and down my neck. I stopped because my body understood them before my mind did. They were not strangers looking for a wallet. They were the same kind of men who show up on paydays, who call my father's name like it is still alive. My tote pressed into my hip. My fingers tightened around the strap until they ached. Water pooled in my collar, and I forced my breathing to stay even, like Lily was watching me. They made it clear they wanted tonight's payment, and they made it clear my small tips were an insult. One of them leaned in close enough that I smelled cigarettes and winter mints. He reminded me the balance grows every day, no matter how hard I work. Then his eyes flicked to my bag, and his tone shifted, like money was not the real hunger. He implied my father left something behind, a key, a file, a piece of leverage that belonged to them. I shook my head without lifting my chin. I had searched everything and found only dust. The stockier one shoved my shoulder, not hard enough to bruise, just hard enough to remind me I was small. My tote slipped, hit the slick sidewalk, and the plastic container inside thudded. Before I could grab it, a shoe nudged the bag into a puddle. My throat closed. They thought I was guarding stake-like treasure, and in a way I was. I pulled a damp wad of bills from my pocket, $42, and held it out with a steady hand I did not feel. They walked away, leaving a warning behind, and the night suddenly felt too open. I waited until their footsteps faded, then dropped to my knees on the wet concrete. The container was scratched but sealed. Relief hit so fast it made my eyes burn. I wiped the mud off with my sleeve, cradling it like a fragile thing. My building loomed ahead, a tired brick walk-up with a broken buzzer and a hallway that always smelled of bleach and old smoke. Each stair creaked under me. I kept looking back, half expecting the collectors to return, half expecting that dark SUV to glide into view. Nothing moved, yet the air felt watched anyway. Inside my apartment, the radiator clicked like a nervous metronome. The living room was also the kitchen and also the place my daughter did her homework. A half-empty cereal box sat on the counter beside Lily's inhaler spacer. I set the tote down quietly and crossed to her bed. Lily slept with her mouth open, hair stuck to her forehead, one arm thrown over her rabbit. I pressed 2 fingers to her back and felt her breathing, steady for now. Guilt came in waves. I kissed her temple and promised tomorrow would be easier. I whispered it into darkness. Only then did I let myself feel the hunger, sharp and embarrassing. I opened the container on the chipped coffee table and the smell made my stomach twist with hope. I lifted a fork, then stopped. A faint tapping came through the wall, soft, rhythmic, too familiar to ignore. Mrs. Delaney's signal. I breathed out slowly, wiped my face with both hands, and practiced a smile I did not have. I carried the container to the door, stepping over Lily's backpack, and opened up to the hallway's weak light. She stood there with her walker, eyes clouded, shoulders trembling quietly. She did not ask with pride. She asked the way winter asks a window to hold, impatient but relentless. She mentioned the soup kitchen being closed, her legs failing her again, and I heard the truth under every word. She was hungry. I told her the chef at the penthouse had made too much, like it was a funny mistake. I placed the whole container into her thin hands. I did not split it. I did not save a bite. I said I had eaten earlier, and my own stomach betrayed me with a cramp. She thanked me, eyes wet. I guided her back into her apartment and waited until her lock clicked. The moment the sound faded, my performance collapsed. I slid down my own door and sat on the floor, knees pulled close, arms wrapped tight around myself. I did not cry. Crying costs water and time, and I was already short on both. I just rocked once, twice, trying to quiet the ache in my belly and the ache in my chest. In River North, they would call me a thief. In this hallway, I was just a mother doing math with love. Night was not done. By the time I stood, my legs were numb. I checked Lily, tucked her blanket, and listened for the hallway to breathe. Nothing. One blind slat hung crooked, leaving a thin gap. I looked through it. Rain turned the street into black glass. A vehicle sat at the curb, lights off, too clean for this block. Beside it, a man stood motionless, watching my building. I could not see his face, but my skin recognized that silent focus from the penthouse. My stomach dropped. Someone had watched me give away the food, and whatever came next would rewrite my debt. Morning came too bright, like the city was pretending nothing happened. I barely slept, because every time Lily coughed in her sleep, I heard boots in the hallway outside our door. When my phone buzzed with a message from the penthouse manager telling me Mr. Rinaldi wanted me upstairs now, my stomach dropped. I dressed in my uniform with hands that would not stop shaking. On the bus north, I rehearsed apologies I hated. I imagined being escorted out, badge taken, and my daughter's life collapsing behind me. The container was gone, but the shame still rode my ribs raw. The penthouse smelled of coffee and disinfectant, clean enough to feel hostile. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the skyline into a postcard, while I walked to Cole's office like I was approaching a judge. The hallway was quiet in that expensive way. No laughter, no clutter, only soft carpet and hidden cameras. When the door opened, I saw him standing, not behind the desk but beside it, as if furniture was too small for control. His gaze pinned me before my shoes stopped moving. I felt the same night silence, only sharpened by daylight and glass. He did not mention the roast or the rules. Instead, he made it clear he knew exactly where I lived, exactly who had confronted me, and exactly how close I had come to being dragged into a car. My throat tightened as he laid out details only a watcher would notice. The corner, the timing, the way the men waited. He did not call them collectors, but his meaning landed hard. Derek Kane. The name hit like a bruise. I had spent years paying him to keep breathing. Cole's calm told me Kane's reach had crossed into his territory now. Then he slid a single sheet toward me. I did not want to touch it because paper can change a life faster than fists. The document was formal, dense, stamped, and my eyes snagged on the amount, $150,000. My father's debt, reborn in clean ink. But the holder's name was not Kane's shell company. It was Cole Rinaldi's. For one breath, relief flooded me, because Kane could not claim me anymore. The next breath turned to ice. The debt had not disappeared. It had moved from me. I realized I had been traded like a file, and he expected gratitude. Cole spoke in solutions, not comfort. He framed everything as security and efficiency, like my fear was a messy ledger he could balance. He increased my salary, but made it clear the extra would never pass through my hands. Payments would go straight from payroll into the debt he now owned. He outlined protection, cameras, drivers if needed, and the staff quarters in the East Wing, empty and locked down. In exchange, I would be available whenever he required. 24/7. I heard the offer and saw the bars. A safer cage is still a cage, and my skin knew it. My mind flashed to Lily's face at breakfast, her purple backpack slumped by the door, her inhaler clipped to the side pocket like a tiny lifeline. If I said yes, I would be safe, fed, and watched. But my daughter would feel my absence in every morning. I also thought of Mrs. Delaney's tapping, her thin hands shaking around my plastic container. Cole's plan protected me by shrinking my world to his walls. And Kane's men had hinted again about the missing key. If they believed I had it, hiding me here might paint a target on Lily as well. Cole's attention stayed on me like a spotlight. It was not soft. It was measured, almost clinical, yet it made my pulse jump anyway. I could feel the power in his restraint, the way he refused to raise his voice because he never needed to. Part of me wanted to accept just to stop being afraid. Another part wanted to push back because I had spent too long being owned by men who used my father's mistakes as a leash. I kept asking myself what he saw when he looked at me. Risk, guilt, or something darker inside his silence. He waited for my answer like he already owned it. The room was so quiet I could hear my own swallow. I stared at the paper, at the neat lines that reduced my life to a number and a signature. I pictured myself in a small room in the East Wing, safe, yes, but always on call, always monitored, always one request away from proving my worth. I thought of Lily waking up and not finding me. The word formed before I could polish it. I refused. I said no without explaining why. The air went sharp, like glass underfoot. Cole did not move. He simply watched me the way he had in the kitchen, as if waiting for me to flinch and take it back. The sunlight on his desk made everything look normal, but nothing was normal anymore. My hands were steady now, and that steadiness felt dangerous. In the silence, I understood I had just challenged a man who built his life on control. I backed toward the door, heart hammering, and felt his gaze follow me out. Somewhere in the penthouse, a decision was being made. I would learn how far his control could stretch next. The silence after my refusal followed me out of his office like a shadow. I walked the hallway with my spine straight and my lungs locked, pretending I wasn't shaking. The penthouse looked the same. Sunlight on stone, art on the walls, air that smelled expensive. But my whole life had tilted. In the service corridor, my badge felt heavier on my chest, as if it could turn into a chain any second. I kept thinking of the man outside my window last night, the dark SUV, the stillness. Fear loves quiet places, and I would not let it end either. I had said no because I wasn't brave. I had said no because I was tired of being moved around like a piece on someone else's board. If I vanished into Cole Rinaldi's world, Lily would wake up to strangers and schedules, not my hands tying her shoes, not my voice reminding her to breathe slow when her chest tightened. And Mrs. Delaney would sit behind her door listening for my steps, her pride too stubborn to call anyone else. I could not trade one kind of fear for another, no matter how polished the cage was, it felt, on inside. Lily's mornings are small miracles I can't outsource. She hates the seams in her socks, so I turn them inside out without telling her. She forgets her spelling words unless I make a game of them at the kitchen table. She trusts my face more than any promise from a system that has failed us before. When her inhaler runs low, I refill it early because I've learned emergencies don't wait for payday. I am her safe place, not because I am perfect, but because I am there. That's the bargain I refuse to break even when night demands otherwise. Mrs. Delaney isn't family on paper, but she is family in practice. She forgets where she puts her pill bottle, so I label it in thick marker. Her hands shake when she holds a mug, so I leave tea bags where she can reach them. Some days she tells me the same story twice, and then I listen both times because being heard is its own kind of medicine. She tries to pay me with crumpled singles, and I pretend not to see them. In our building, loneliness kills quietly. I refuse to be another closed door for her or me. Still, as I stood outside the office door, I felt the other fear crawling up my throat. Derek Kane's collectors didn't care about rules or contracts. They cared about leverage, and my father's name had become their favorite weapon. Cole could shield me from them, but his protection came with his fingerprints on every part of my life. I hated that I needed him. I hated that my mind kept replaying his still gaze in the kitchen, like he'd seen straight through my excuses and into my heart. Then the door opened again, and I stepped in, refusing to bow. Inside, Cole didn't soften. He simply redirected the situation like a man moving chess pieces. He made it clear he had heard my refusal and understood the reason behind it, even though I had not said it out loud. A tablet screen turned toward me showed my building's hallway, captured earlier that morning. A nurse stood in Mrs. Delaney's doorway with a clipboard. Grocery bags sat on the floor. Another message displayed a school pickup schedule with Lily's name, a trusted driver's plate number, and a contact line that answered immediately. He had funded it all before I asked once. My first instinct was to distrust it, because gifts in my life always came with hooks. My second instinct was to collapse from relief so intense it hurt. I felt my eyes sting and forced myself to blink it back. I didn't want him to watch me break. Yet the truth was brutal. He had reached into the only two places I kept sacred and protected them without needing permission. That kind of attention felt like safety and invasion at the same time. I realized he wasn't just buying my debt. He was studying my love, and that terrified me. I told myself I would accept nothing out of gratitude. I would accept only because my condition had been met, because Lily would be safe, and Mrs. Delaney would eat whether I was there or not. Cole repeated his terms in the same calm way, like weather, staff quarters, security, a new schedule, and work that could shift at any hour. I agreed to the first step, but inside I set my own rules. I would not become a pet. I would not forget my name. If I stayed under his roof, I would stay standing even when walls whispered. An hour later, I carried one small suitcase down the east wing, following a house manager who avoided my eyes. The staff quarters door clicked open to a room that was clean, quiet, and too prepared, like someone had pictured my needs in advance. Fresh sheets, a folded towel, a keycard with my name typed neatly. I set Lily's photo on the nightstand and stared until my chest eased. Beyond the walls, Cole's empire kept breathing. I felt it in the vents, the cameras, the silence. Tomorrow he would hand me paper to shred. I knew it would change everything. Living in the East Wing felt like sleeping inside a museum after closing. Everything was clean, padded, and too quiet, as if noise might stain the walls. I woke before dawn because my body still ran on danger, not comfort. I checked my phone for Lily's school updates and Mrs. Delaney's care notes the way other people checked weather. Then I made my bed with military corners, hung my uniform, and waited for the next instruction. The air vents hummed like machinery. Somewhere beyond the locked doors, Cole Rinaldi's world kept moving, and I was now part of its schedule. Later that morning, a house manager escorted me to the study where sunlight hit the desk like a blade. Cole stood there with coffee gone cold, sleeves rolled, eyes already working. He indicated several cardboard boxes stacked by a shredder, the kind that could eat a phone book. He wanted the papers destroyed, all of them, old ledgers and shipping records from years he considered settled. He didn't explain why. He didn't need to. My job, as he defined it, was obedience. I knelt on the rug, fed a page into the machine, and then listened to the crunch all morning. At first, I tried to be invisible again, letting the shredder's rhythm cover my thoughts. But the pages kept catching my eye before they reached the slot. The totals balanced. The columns lined up. Still, the ink felt wrong, like a picture hung crooked by a millimeter. I couldn't stop seeing it. My brain doesn't read spreadsheets like most people. I see architecture, spacing, weight, the quiet pull of negative space. Years ago, before my father's debt swallowed my life, I designed layouts for clients who cared about how a line breathed. Bad design always made my skin itch today. I pulled a sheet from the pile and held it to the lamp. One dateline looked slightly bolder, not enough for anyone to name it, but enough for me to feel tension. I found another page with the same swelling. Then another. My hands moved on their own. I stopped feeding the shredder and began spreading papers across the rug, making a grid like a mood board. 3 months, then 4. The entries formed a beat repeating at intervals. When I wrote it down, the spacing echoed a climb. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. Patterns meant people always. Cole's attention snapped to the missing noise, the shredder gone quiet. I sensed him watching before I looked up, the way you feel weather shift. He made it plain he expected destruction, not paper spread across his rug. I swallowed and explained in simple terms, describing the page the way I would describe a poster. Tension, tiny swelling in certain lines, a beat that repeated. My voice felt small in that room. For a moment, he looked like he might end this job on the spot, and then he turned to his screens and started digging, fast and relentless without hesitation. His hands moved over the keyboard like he trusted it more than breath. He didn't ask me for equations. He hunted the irregularity itself, the formatting fingerprint. The monitors filled with highlighted entries. My mouth went dry as the list kept growing. Then a total appeared on the screen. $4,200,000. For a second, it felt fake, a number from someone else's life. Then fear landed hard. If I could see this, whoever planted it knew it could be seen. I steadied my knees and held my face still, because in this house, weakness looked like permission. I refused that permission. Cole leaned back, and the chair creaked in the quiet. His eyes lifted to me, not the glance he gave staff, but a look that measured capability. I felt exposed, like my mind had stepped into the room first. I admitted, in my own careful way, that I once worked in design, living by tiny details most people never notice. I remembered the old laptop I sold for rent and the portfolio I lost when my father got sick. Cole's attention didn't soften, but it sharpened into something like respect. That scared me more than anger, and it felt dangerous. He made it clear the shredding could wait. The priority had changed. He brought out a lockdown laptop that looked too expensive to breathe on and set it in front of me like a tool. My new task, as he framed it, was to hunt this visual lie through every year he had on file. Not just 2021. Not just one department. Everything. My stomach flipped between pride and panic. If someone inside his operation used this trick once, they could be close. And now my name was attached to what we found in a world where mistakes got punished. I left his office carrying the laptop like it was evidence. The hallway felt different now that I wasn't only cleaning it. I was inside the machine. Staff glanced at me and looked away, sensing the shift. In my room, I set the laptop beside Lily's photo and stared at the black surface. I felt useful again, and the feeling was dangerous. Someone had been stealing millions under Cole's nose, and I had touched the thread. I couldn't tell if Cole kept me close because he trusted me, or because he needed control. Either way, I was done being invisible. By the third morning in the East Wing, I stopped waking up startled and started waking up prepared. I checked my phone for Lily's school pickup confirmation, then the nurse note that Mrs. Delaney had eaten and taken her meds. Only after that did I open the secure laptop. Numbers filled the screen, but I wasn't hunting numbers anymore. I was hunting rhythm. I showered fast, tied my hair back, and kept my badge visible, like this was deployment and not a mansion. Useful felt good. Being useful felt dangerous. Every click sounded louder than it should in that house. In the staff hallways, people still called me by my first name, but their eyes slid away from the laptop in my hands. I noticed new locks on certain doors, new cameras angled toward corners that used to be blind. Cole had tightened the perimeter, and that meant someone inside it had forced his hand. I kept thinking about the $4,200,000 and how a thief that clever wouldn't forgive being noticed. When I walked past the kitchen, I felt the old instinct to shrink, and then I remembered, shrinking never saved me. It only hid me. Now I was visible here. That night, a message sent through the house manager pulled me back to Cole's office after dinner service. The penthouse was darker, lit by the city and a single desk lamp, and it felt less like a home than a command center. He had papers spread out, screens open, and my notes clipped neatly beside them. He didn't order me to stand at the doorway. He indicated the leather chair across from him, the one I'd seen executives sit in on TV. My pulse jumped as I sat, because permission is its own kind of trap. I felt him watching. I walked him through what my eyes kept catching. Tiny spacing shifts that showed up in clusters, like someone tagging moments of theft without touching the totals. He listened without interrupting, which was stranger than any praise. When I paused, he didn't rush to fill the silence. He waited as if my conclusion mattered more than his impatience. I realized I was standing close enough to smell his cologne and the bitter coffee on his breath, and he was close enough to see my hands stop trembling. The air between us felt like a wire pulled tight, ready to snap. At some point, he noticed I kept working past hunger, the way I used to ignore my own body to keep everyone else alive. He pressed a button on the intercom and arranged food to appear, simple and real, not plated like a museum piece. When a tray arrived, he made it clear I was expected to eat before I earned the right to keep solving his problems. I took a bite and felt embarrassed by how fast relief moved through me. Being cared for without having to beg felt unfamiliar. Suspicious. I ate because pride doesn't feed a child. After we finished, he shifted the conversation to something that sounded unrelated until I heard the logic. A charity auction downtown, full of polished donors and hidden deals. He needed an eye that could spot what didn't belong, the same way I spotted lies in spreadsheets. My job, he implied, would be to stand beside him and read canvases the way I read pages. He also implied I could not show up in a maid's uniform. A garment bag arrived in my room an hour later, and inside was a green dress that looked like courage and fabric for me. I changed slowly, like the zipper might accuse me. The color pulled my eyes forward in the mirror, making me look awake. I pinned my hair with shaking fingers and thought of Lily, of how she loved green crayons because they meant spring. When I stepped into the main hallway, staff paused, and I felt a tension like a hand on my shoulder. Cole waited near the private elevator, composed and severe. When his gaze landed on me, it didn't feel like approval. It felt like recognition. I took his arm, and the doors closed us into light for once tonight. Grant drove, and the city smeared across the tinted windows in streaks. I tried to focus on my breathing, but my nerves kept counting exits, shadows, overpasses. Cole sat beside me without touching me, yet his presence filled the space like a wall. He checked his phone, then the mirrors, then the road ahead, and I sensed the moment his attention tightened. The traffic slowed in a tunnel approach where it shouldn't have slowed. My skin prickled. The air felt pressurized, as if the night leaned closer, and I wondered who had learned my name and decided I was worth taking. Headlights flared behind us, close, and a second vehicle slid up on our right like it had rehearsed the move. Grant tapped the brakes, then had to slam them. The seatbelt cut into my shoulder. The walls narrowed, and we were trapped in lane with no space to breathe. I saw men stepping out ahead, silhouettes against tunnel lights, and my stomach turned cold. Cole's hand lifted in a signal for me to get low, and I understood this was not a crash. It was a collection. Someone had come for me, and they knew where to find me. Headlights exploded in the mirror, so close the world turned white. Tunnel lights strobed over the windshield, slicing the dark into quick, bright frames, and every frame showed the same thing. No space. Grant braked. The car shuddered, and the lane tightened around us like a fist. Metal somewhere scraped, a long animal sound that made my teeth buzz. My breath left all at once. My hands searched the seat, the door, anything solid. The green fabric at my knees suddenly felt ridiculous. Then the traffic ahead stopped completely. I could hear my heartbeat louder than engines, than my thoughts. Cole's body moved before fear had a chance to bloom. He leaned across me, not rough, just absolute, guiding my shoulders down so my head sat below the window line. His calm was terrifying, the kind that comes from rehearsed disasters. I saw his eyes flick to the mirrors, the ceiling, the narrow strip of shoulder beside the wall. He didn't reach for comfort. He reached for outcomes. Grant's hands stayed steady on the wheel, waiting for a signal I could feel more than see. Outside, a silhouette stepped from vehicles, slow and confident. Carried purpose, not panic, and I knew. One man lifted his hands as if inviting surrender, but the stance was wrong for rescue. Another kept glancing toward my door, not Cole's. That detail cut through my haze. This was about me. About the rumor that my father hid something worth tearing lives apart. Cole positioned himself between me and the window, broad shoulders blocking the view, and I understood he lived with choices like this daily. My fear tried to freeze my limbs, yet my mind stayed awake. I tracked boots, shadows, angles, counting steps the way I counted spacing on paper, looking for pattern to escape. Cole's hand closed around my wrist, firm, pulling me toward the floorboards. He guided me through a narrow gap between seats as Grant yanked a latch near the console. The rear of the car popped and a burst of attention shifted behind us. In that heartbeat, Cole shoved the door open and moved first, making himself the target. I followed, dress dragging, shoes slipping on wet grit. The tunnel air tasted like exhaust and concrete dust. He steered us toward a small metal door set into the wall, half hidden by grime. Lungs burned, but I did not stop moving. Inside, the sound dropped like a curtain. The corridor was narrow, lit by flickering fluorescent strips that made everything look sickly and unreal. Cole shoved the door shut and locked it with a motion so practiced it made me shiver. My hands went to my ribs, my legs, checking for pain I hadn't earned yet. I was shaking, not from injury, but from the sudden absence of noise. Cole watched me, scanning, and I realized he was counting threats even when walls stood between us. I drew in air slowly until it obeyed. Outside, footsteps and voices smeared into echoes. When my pulse slowed, my thoughts got sharp. They hadn't tried to smash the car into pieces. They hadn't rushed in blind. Everything about their movement said capture, not revenge. That meant they believed I was carrying a secret, something my father had taken before he died, something that could unlock money or ruin men like Cain. I wanted to deny it, but denial didn't change their belief. Cole's presence beside me felt steady, expectant, like he was waiting for the truth to surface. I remembered my father's stubborn habits. He hated flash drives, hated anything obvious. He loved layers. Layers was his word for everything. He layered code, layered jokes, he layered grief he never spoke about. when he started painting near the end. I thought it was one more distraction, one more way to avoid the mess he'd made. The canvases were terrible, thick swirls of color that looked like noise. Still, I kept them when I packed, because they smelled of him, of acrylic and coffee. In the corridor light, the idea landed with clarity. If he needed to hide something, he would hide it where nobody looked twice. Not in a drawer, in plain sight, under paint. I felt the urge to laugh and vomit at once. All those nights I blamed my father for leaving only debt, and now I wondered if he left a trapdoor too. I didn't say it out loud, but Cole's head tilted as if he could hear my thoughts. I gathered myself and made it clear, with a look and a breath, aimed that we needed to return to the penthouse and find the canvases before anyone else did. Outside, the tunnel still held danger, but time felt like the weapon. If Kane's people guessed right, they would come harder next time. We moved deeper into the maintenance passage, away from the muffled chaos, and the tunnel lights behind us faded into a glow. My dress brushed the wall, collecting dust, but I didn't care. I kept seeing those canvases stacked in my old closet, the ones I almost threw out because they looked pointless. Now they felt like a map. Cole's presence stayed at my shoulder, guiding, and I understood I was being pulled into his orbit for good. I didn't know if my father had saved me or cursed me again. I only knew we had to get there first. By the time we slipped back into the River North garage, now my green dress was dusted with tunnel grit and my hands still shook in tiny aftershocks. Cole moved like nothing had happened, calm enough to be cruel, steering me through private doors and silent hallways while the city's noise stayed trapped outside the glass. I kept expecting sirens, pounding, another set of headlights. Instead, there was only the soft hum of the building and the sound of my own breathing trying to catch up. He took me downstairs I'd never used, past a locked gym, past storage rooms that smelled like cardboard and winter coats, into the belly of the penthouse. The air changed there, cooler, older, like secrets had been sleeping for years. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that my father had died broke and broken, and that I was chasing a fantasy because fear makes you desperate for meaning. But the memory of those men stepping toward my door in the tunnel made my stomach harden. They believed I had something. Belief can be more dangerous than truth. The canvases were stacked behind plastic bins, wrapped in brown paper I'd taped myself when I moved out of my old place. I pulled the first one free and the smell hit me. Dried acrylic and that faint metallic note my father always carried from too much coffee and not enough sleep. His noise phase, he'd called it, like he could joke his way through ruin. The paint was thick, ridged, thrown on in angry swirls of red and gray. It wasn't art. It was a bruise. I ran my fingertips over the rough surface and remembered his hands, long fingers that could type code for hours and still shake when he tried to hold my face and promise he would fix everything. Cole returned with a handheld light from one of his safes, the kind used to search for things people swear aren't there. He didn't explain it. He simply placed it in my palms like he trusted my instinct more than my doubt. I swept the beam across the first painting. Nothing changed. Just dull color and heavy texture. I tried the second canvas, then the third, my pulse climbing with each failure. I could hear my own thoughts turning ugly. Maybe my father really was only a gambler. Maybe I had dragged Cole into a dead end. Maybe the tunnel was just a warning and the next time they wouldn't bother being careful. Then I lifted the light to the smallest canvas, a mess of deep greens and blacks, and the room seemed to inhale. Under the beam, the chaos dissolved. A precise pattern appeared, glowing faintly, geometric and deliberate, like a language hiding under paint. My throat went tight. I moved the light slowly, afraid the image would vanish if I breathed too hard. And the pattern held. It wasn't a picture. It was a map. I felt grief slam into me, followed by something sharper. Vindication. My father had been broken, yes, But he hadn't been meaningless. Cole handed me his phone, secure and heavy, and I framed the glowing geometry on the screen. The camera struggled for a heartbeat, then locked, and the pattern resolved into a code-like grid. A prompt appeared, asking for a key. Not a password I could guess, but something personal. My mind jumped to the only song my father ever sang me after my mom died. A nonsense lullaby made of numbers, soft as breath. He would tap them on my forehead, then laugh when I got them wrong. I entered the sequence the way I remembered it, and when it failed, I flipped it in reverse, because my father loved mirrors. The screen changed. A directory opened. Files stacked down the page in neat rows, names that meant nothing to me until I saw the numbers beside them, and the notes in my father's shorthand. Accounts, transfers, ledgers of favors and threats. Proof. Enough to ruin Derek Kane. Enough to make his collectors disappear or turn on him. Enough to start a war if handled wrong. My stomach rolled with the weight of it. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, to pretend I'd never seen it, but I also felt a fierce, ugly satisfaction bloom in my chest. For years, I'd paid for my father's mistakes. Now I was holding his last move. Cole's gaze turned colder as he scrolled, already calculating outcomes, already seeing the end of Kane. I made it clear I would not be shipped away or hidden while men decided my future again. If we were going to use this, I would be there, hands steady, eyes open. We had to move fast before Kane's side guessed the paintings were the hiding place, and as we climbed back toward the penthouse lights, I understood I wasn't just protected anymore. I was involved, and there was no going back. In my room, the green dress hung like proof of how quickly my life had changed. I stared at Lily's photo, then at the phone in Cole's hand, and felt the seconds ticking like interest. Somewhere in the city, Kane's men were regrouping, asking why their trap failed. If they came again, they would come smarter. We needed a trap before they built theirs, and I was done waiting. Our adrenaline stayed in my blood even after we were back upstairs. The penthouse was silent, but my ears kept replaying tunnel echoes, headlights, the scrape of metal. Cole laid my father's phone screen beside a stack of printed pages, then turned the room into a war table. Routes, times, names, and a single goal. End Derek Kane's leverage fast. I didn't want revenge. I wanted Lily's mornings to be boring again. I wanted Mrs. Delaney to nap without listening for boots. I made myself breathe and set my boundary inside my chest. No chaos, no loose ends, no show. Whatever happened had to be clean, controlled, final. Cole didn't argue. He simply adjusted the plan around that condition, as if my conscience was another constraint to engineer. That was the first time I felt like a participant, not cargo. If Kane came for me, and he would meet my choice, not fear. We moved like we were racing a clock only we could hear. Cole's fixer, Grant, arranged calls and coordinates while I sat at the desk with my hands flat, forcing them steady. The files from my father's hidden directory weren't just money trails. They were proof, names, and dates that could lock Kane in a cage the way he'd caged me with debt. Cole wanted to hit him hard and quiet. I insisted the trap protect innocent bystanders, and that Lily's school never see a headline with my name. So we chose a neutral industrial yard by the river, a place loud enough to swallow secrets. I carried a decoy, a small metal drive that looked like a key to a greedy mind, while the real evidence stayed encrypted and out of sight. My role was simple. Draw Kane close, let him think he'd won, then hold steady when the net tightened. Night air off the river cut through my coat as we arrived. The yard was a maze of containers and rusted fencing, lit by harsh sodium lamps that made everyone look guilty. I could taste diesel and cold steel. Cole stayed near me without touching, his presence a hard line at my side. I kept my gaze calm and my shoulders loose, the way I did when I had to walk past Kane's men on my block and pretend I wasn't afraid. In my head, I anchored to Lily's laugh, to Mrs. Delaney's soft tapping, to the truth that I'd survived worse with less. A van rolled in, then another car, and the silhouette stepped out with the arrogance of people who never expect consequences. Kane didn't need to raise his voice for me to feel the demand in the air. He expected me to hand over my life again, and I held the decoy between two fingers like it was nothing, because fear is a scent, and Kane loved smelling it. He moved closer, eyes fixed on my hand, not on my face, as if I was a delivery service instead of a person. I let him believe that. I let him believe the tunnel had broken me and that I was ready to trade anything for peace. When he reached for it, I made a small motion, tossing the drive just past his shoulder toward the concrete behind him. It wasn't violence, it was misdirection. Greed pulled his attention the way gravity pulls water, and in that half-second, Cole shifted position, guiding me back into shadow. I didn't run. I stayed upright, watching Kane's confidence crack as his men hesitated, suddenly unsure which threat mattered more, the prize, or the trap, forming around them. I felt the net closing. Lights flashed at the yard's edge like a sudden sunrise. Doors slammed. Boots hit pavement in a synchronized rush, and the space that had belonged to Kane stopped belonging to him. Commands blurred into a wall of sound, and hands went up around us as if gravity had changed. I stood still, heartbeat pounding, while Cole kept me behind him, and Grant guided us away from the center. Kane's face shifted from smug to stunned, the way a bully looks when authority finally appears. The air filled with motion, but not chaos. It was a system closing a file. Outside the fence, cold air hit my lungs clean and sharp. I laughed once, broken and breathless, because for the first time in years I didn't feel hunted. Cole's eyes confirmed what my body couldn't trust yet. Kane was caged, and my life was mine to keep. I could breathe again. Back at the car, the city sounded ordinary again. Horns, water on pavement, life continuing without permission. My hands still shook, but the shake was relief, not terror. Cole steadied me with a brief touch, then withdrew as if closeness created risk. On the drive home, he stared out the window, jaw tight, already building walls. I tried to enjoy the win, but unease crept in. He was too quiet, the same quiet that had watched me in the kitchen, the quiet of a man making decisions alone. When we reached the penthouse, he didn't ask what I wanted next. He moved like the next chapter was already written, one where I was safe because I was far away. I recognized the outline before it arrived. An exit plan dressed as kindness. The collectors were gone, but I sensed a new battle forming in silence, and I refused to move. 3 days after Kane was taken, the penthouse felt too clean, like someone had erased fingerprints from air. The stacks of paper in Cole's office were gone, the hallways polished, the staff quieter. Cole moved through rooms with his old armor back on, eyes restless, hands always adjusting cuffs that did not need adjusting. I could feel him pulling away from me, not in anger, but in preparation, the way a storm door is latched before the wind returns. Every time my phone buzzed with Lily's updates, I remembered why I could not let him decide my life again, alone. On the 4th morning, a message summoned me to his study. The walk there echoed the first time I thought I would be fired, except my shoulders stayed squared, and my breath stayed steady. I was no longer the maid caught with leftovers. I was the woman who had stood in a tunnel and refused to freeze. Sunlight poured across the obsidian desk, bright enough to look forgiving, but the room still felt like a courtroom. Cole stood by the window with his back half turned, as if facing me directly might weaken his decision. A sealed envelope waited there. He slid the packet toward me without softening. Inside were deeds, banking papers, and a plain itinerary, all arranged like a cure. An apartment in Paris with my name on it. A draft for $2 million labeled as a consulting bonus. A formal statement showing my $150,000 debt, erased, stamped, and final. I understood his logic before my emotions caught up. Distance equals safety, and safety equals control. He believed he was saving me from the next tunnel, the next collector, the next bulletproof door. He also believed I would thank him and disappear before he changed his mind for good. My confusion lasted one heartbeat, then anger rushed in, clean and hot. Paris was not freedom to me. It was exile wrapped in silk. I am a mother first, and Lily is not a suitcase I can carry across an ocean on someone else's schedule. I have a chosen family in Chicago, even if it started with leftovers and wall taps. More than that, I had finally learned to stand inside danger without begging. Cole was trying to relocate my agency the way Kane had tried to collect my body. Different packaging, same message. My choice does not matter anymore. I looked at the papers again and felt the weight of what I was about to do. $2 million could buy comfort, tutors, doctors, and a future where Lily never saw my fear. It could buy 1,000 breakfasts. My hands tore the packet in half. The sound was harsh in the silent office, like ripping a rule book, and I tore it again, and again, until the Paris skyline became scraps on the floor. It hurt, not because I wanted money, but because I knew how hard it is to reject help when you have been drowning. I refused to be managed. In that snowfall of paper, I finally named myself. Not Maid, not debtor, not rescued. I was a partner, or I was nothing. I made it clear, steadily, that I would stay in Chicago by choice, with boundaries that kept Lily's life normal and my dignity intact. I would work, learn, and protect what mattered, but I would not be owned. Beneath all the logic, I admitted the truth I had tried to hide from myself. I cared for Cole, fiercely, because he saw my heart and did not mock it. Loving him scared me, but leaving did more today. Cole's face didn't soften, but something in him shifted. He gathered the pages without anger, not to salvage the offer, but to accept my refusal. In the quiet, he let control loosen enough to honor my choice, and that surrender felt heavier than gift. He signaled that if I stayed, the rules would change. Truth, protection, and work that matched my mind, not my uniform. I understood this was his love, built from action, not promises. I stepped closer, leaned my forehead to his chest for one breath, and chose safety on purpose. When I pulled back, we stood steadier. 6 months later, the sound in my life was different. Mrs. Delaney lived in assisted care near Lincoln Park, where nurses knew her stories and meals arrived warm. I visited every Sunday with Lily, bringing crossword books and letting her scold me for working too much. Lily's mornings became boring miracles: pancakes, hair bows, spelling practice, and the inhaler never running out. She called the penthouse a tall house, not a scary one. The fear that lived in my throat loosened, replaced by routine, and routine felt like wealth. I stopped stealing leftovers because nobody went hungry in our world. I rebuilt what debt stole from me. A small design studio opened near the river, my name on the glass, and my laptop on a real desk. I designed branding for clients and reviewed Cole's companies for the cracks I once found in his ledgers. He kept his promise to clean what could be cleaned, replacing fear-based deals with contracts that looked dull to outsiders and revolutionary to us. Some nights he sat in the studio after Lily fell asleep, watching me work without words. I learned his silence could mean respect. I learned my silence could mean peace. Looking back, I don't hear shame in that night of leftovers. I hear a mother refusing to let hunger win. I hear a woman choosing herself. My father's mess nearly broke me, but it taught me patterns can be repaired. Cole didn't save me by locking me away. He saved me by respecting my choice to stay and build. If this story hit you, comment. Would you take Paris or fight for your own terms? What offer have you torn up in your life? Like, share, and comment so I know you're here. Tell me the moment that hit you.